From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and today I'm just getting ready to plant a clematis. But I wanted you to see what we have coming up in the grass here. All these daffodils that I naturalized in here last fall are now coming into blossom. I should say that that long grass is what we have to maintain until the foliage on the daffodils matures completely, which will probably be mid-June in this part of the country. Then we can mow the lawn, but we've got to put strength back into those bulbs for next year. While we're talking about grass, let's look right down here, and you see the grass seedlings coming out of the ground, those grass seed which I sowed just 3 weeks ago, coming up very nicely. You see the different sizes of grass, depends upon the varieties, a grass mixture. And those little pink things you see are the petals that fell off the crabapple trees. Well, today we're going to plant some roses, we're going to plant some perennials, and in the vegetable line we're going to plant parsnips, Jerusalem artichokes, and kohlrabi, and then we're going to move in the greenhouse and plant some cucumbers and melons to get ahead of the spring season. Well, first of all, let's talk about this clematis, and I'm going to grow the clematis over here against this wall. Well, I'm going to spell it out for you because a lot of people wonder just how do you spell clematis? C-L-E-M-A-T-I-S. This is the name for a whole group of plants, some of which will grow in any part of the United States. Their colors go from lavender and purple through pinks and reds to yellow and white. They like either sunshine or shade. They need an alkaline soil, and you see what I've been doing here. I've been sprinkling some lime right on top of the ground. I've got to be sure that these clematis have a good alkaline soil. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about is clematis are peculiar in that they, as an old saying in gardening, they like to have their heads in the sun and their feet in the shade. Well, we're going to plant them so their heads do come up here in the sunshine, but then we will mulch the soil around them, or we will plant some low-growing annuals to shade the soil to help to keep the roots cool. The thing I should tell you about clematis is very important to know that there are, of the many kinds, the kind most suitable for most gardeners are the hybrids. The hybrids themselves are divided into two classes. The first one, and this is not the one that I'm going to plant or would recommend to you as a beginner, is the type which sends up its growth 1 year, like a climbing rose, and blossoms the second year on that growth. In a cold part of the country, that will sometimes die right back to the ground, so every year all you get is foliage. Instead, I'm planting 3 varieties of clematis, all of which will blossom on growth made this year. Now, the variety that I'm putting in here now is one called Jackmani. Dark, dark purple, and is just about as foolproof as a clematis could be. Very, very easy. You just buy these plants at your garden center. And you notice that they're trained up a little stake even at this point. Very important that the clematis be given something to climb upon. And this is not peculiar to clematis, but to many, many kinds of vines. If they're allowed to ramble on the ground, they don't do as well as when given a support. They want to go right up in the air. Very, very, by the way, they cling by their leaves, which act as tendrils, and the leaves will wrap themselves around a support. We'll put up some trellises for them to grow on. Clematis are very easy to propagate. You can grow them from a cutting very, very, very easily. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are parsnips. And I could very well bet that you've never grown parsnips. Not because they're not easy to grow, but because they take a long, long growing season. You may not ever have eaten parsnips. They are a root vegetable with a white root shaped like a gigantic ice cream cone. We'll dig them in the fall or even next spring. and you saute those in butter, and you have a nice vegetable. It's a long season to grow, white root. They need a soft soil in order to produce a uniform root that's not bumpy. So, since you maybe already have heard me say that I have a rocky garden here, I want to introduce you to a crowbar. And this is the way to make an ice cream cone shaped hole in the ground where I want a parsnip to grow. Or I might say a parsnip shaped hole. Let's push that crowbar down and rotate it. Now we're going to grow a parsnip plant in each of these holes. And so what I'll do is to fill the holes with some good sifted soil. This is an old trick on gardening. If you have a hard soil, make your holes, fill them in like that. Now we're ready to plant the parsnips, and we know just where those are going. Now before I plant them, I want to talk about the two kinds that I'm planting. One is an English variety called White Gem. It's a short, stubby root, good for hard soils. And then an American variety called Harris Model. Long root, stupendous variety, especially for a good sandy loam. Now, I will thin these plants out to where they stand about 8 inches apart, so each will have plenty of room to grow. So no need of my sowing the seeds all the way along in between. I'll just put a pinch in here. There are 4 seeds. Cover them about a ½ inch deep and pat them down. Drop a few more in like that. Pat them down. Those are planted, but those things won't be out of the ground for 3 weeks or maybe longer. Well, in the meantime, if your garden is like my garden, you'd have weeds coming up all through here. So I'm going to mark the spot by dropping a few radish seeds just right in between where the parsnips are. We'll just put in a few radishes. They'll be up in about a week's time. They'll be up before the weeds are. And what's more, we'll pull those radishes for eating in just about a month. By that time, the parsnips will be up and growing. One thing you want to remember about parsnips is the seed. You ought to buy fresh seed every year because parsnip seed doesn't last over, as most kinds of seeds do. So buy fresh parsnip seeds, get them in the ground early in the spring. A light sandy soil is best, and you'll watch these grow all summer long, and we'll dig some of them about Thanksgiving time this fall. Well, 2 months ago, just about to the day, I planted in my hotbed some little beet seedlings. And this was for a specific purpose because beets are one of the few root crops which can be transplanted successfully. And I'm going to get a very, very early crop of beets by having these seedlings roughly 2 to 2.5 inches tall now, as compared with the ones in my garden which I sowed last week, which are now just barely coming out of the ground. I'm going to take these over and plant them in another part of the garden. When I cross here, you might like to look at, well, these are the cauliflower and the lettuce that I set in here just 2 weeks ago. Those plants are surely 4 times the size that they were when I planted them. Grow so rapidly. That's what good fertilizer and cool temperatures will do. Now, right in here, I'm going to move this watering can for a minute. I want to tell you that I've dug this soil over. We've had some cow manure on here and put some 5-10-5 fertilizer and marked off this row. But because this is a root crop, I'm again going to dust the soil with diazinon. This is the way to get rid of those soil insects. It doesn't take much. It won't hurt you, but it certainly will hurt the bugs. So we just dust a little diazinon on. Then, in this row, instead of planting a single row of beets, I'm going to plant a double row. Might as well get as much of a production from this row as possible. And this is all there is to it. You see what a strong little seedling we have here. Beautiful little thing. It's just bursting with energy, ready to go. I would like to set these in about 3 inches apart in a double row. And we'll be picking these beets weeks and weeks before we'll ever pick the ones that are now just coming out of the ground. Now it already looks as if we have a batch of beets coming when you see seedlings of this size in the ground. And that's one of the blessings of having a hotbed or a cold frame to get some of these crops started early in the season. Now let's move up here, talk about another vegetable I bet you've never grown, called kohlrabi. You may have not eaten this either. You've probably seen it in your seed catalogs and thought, well, gee, sometime I'm going to plant some. Well, let this be the year. Kohlrabi's in the cabbage family, and it's the swollen stem of the plant is what you eat. The leaves come right out from that thing. Pick them when they're about the size of an apple. Now the trick on it is to get them growing real fast, a lot of nourishment, and a lot of moisture. All I'm going to, since I want these plants to be about 6 or 8 inches apart, I'll put 2 or 3 seeds there, 2 or 3 seeds here, a few along like that. That's all there is to it. We just set them in, cover them over, and I'll take my watering can and, of course, give these a drink of water. Anything that we set out. I should say, back there on those beets that I just transplanted, that water has a little liquid fertilizer mixed with it. Want to get a good booster shot to get going. Now, since we were together last week, I've been working in my perennial garden. And if you look along on this fence, you'll see about 100 or more perennial plants growing. And this is going to be a teaching garden all of this summer. Not only would I want you to get acquainted with perennials and their peculiarities and their good and bad points, I want to show you how to propagate them, how to treat them before and after they're through blossoming. And I should say that perennials truly do live up to their name, and that is they live for years and years and years, most of them with relatively little care. There's one thing I like about perennials long before they blossom. When I go out in the first days of spring and those perennials are popping out of the ground, I know that winter is over. One of the tricks in planting perennials is this. You'd like your taller ones toward the back of the row of your bed. You like your medium-sized ones here, halfway, and then the low fellows here in the front like this. But don't be static. Bring, for example, a medium-sized plant like this blue flax out to the edge so that you get an undulation of heights in the bed. Also, by all means, plant masses of color. Don't plant just one of a kind. It looked really funny, just little dots along in your garden. Now the perennials, one thing you want to watch is, of course, your colors. Here is a flower which is going to be yellow, another one that's going to be yellow. This one here is going to be blue, a nice combination. This is another shade of blue. This is an orange, which will go with the blue. You see, we're shading these colors together, blend them so that they will be attractive all through the season. Now, we're coming back again and again, but the first thing I'm going to do now is to plant in my perennial garden a plant which is not a perennial. This is a biennial known as foxglove. Now, the botanical name for foxglove is digitalis, and I'm sure you're familiar with digitalis as being the plant from which a heart medicine has been extracted. This plant was sown as tiny, tiny seed last May or June, has grown one whole year, lived through the winter, and is now going into its flowering season. We'll set this right over in here between a couple of other ones, so we'll have a nice big clump in this area. This soil, I should say, I've dug this whole thing over, put in compost and some lime and a little bit of fertilizer, but mostly the compost to give this soil, get it well enriched. Now this, of course, whenever you plant out anything of this nature, you have to give them a drink of water. You may be familiar with this tool. If you're ever in the Army, you're familiar with this little trenching tool. You can pick one of these up at the Army and Navy store. They're great for handling a plant which is too big to handle with a trowel, too small to use a spade on. Now the next perennial I'm going to put in is this fellow right here called a daylily. I like a daylily because they can be grown in any part of the United States. Their colors are the wild ones, predominantly yellow and orange. But from that, the plant breeders have come in with shades all the way from cream to maroon and pink, as well as many, many shades of yellow and orange. Choose a hybrid name variety of the color that you want. Now, in a very short time, these things will multiply, so you'll have them in different parts of your garden, and you'll give them away to your friends. We're going to put this daylily right back in here. Now, the name daylily is pretty well taken. Each blossom lasts but a single day. But the beautiful thing about it is it blooms on and on and on for weeks on end. Each flower fading at the end of the day, followed in the next morning by another series of flowers. Pretty great flower, great perennial, absolutely hardy, and as I said, you can grow in any part of the country. Now, it's time that I talk to you about roses. We said that we were going to talk about roses today, and I'm going to begin with this plant, which I picked up at a garden center the other day. I want to point out to you 2 or 3 things about roses and what I would like to do with them. First of all, I like to grow roses all by themselves because they are subject to certain diseases. They like certain fertilizer. Certain kind of bugs like them. If you have them all congregated together, you can sort of give them a monoculture. But that would never deter me from growing roses in my perennial bed, as I'm going to do here. And I've chosen, in this instance, a tea rose by the name of Peace. Huge pink and cream variety. Very, very, very nice rose. If you've never grown roses before, let me give you this word of encouragement. Any part of the United States and Canada, there are wild roses growing, which shows you the roses can grow right out in the wild. If they can do that, then certainly you can cultivate some in your garden. 3 general types of roses other than climbers I'd like to mention. This one is a hybrid tea rose. It has large flowers, usually a single flower on a stem. I'm also going to plant in this garden some floribunda roses. Shorter plants, usually anywhere from 18 inches to 2.5 feet tall, sometimes a bit taller. The flowers come in clusters. And then in between those, as a cross between them, you have the grandiflora rose, which has tea rose-shaped flowers in clusters. Well, now, I dug this whole bed over, as I said, and I put in some cow manure and some compost. And so it isn't a matter of my, at this point, digging an entire, a single great big hole, which you would have to do if you were planting a single rose bush. If I were planting just one rose bush by itself, I would dig a hole at least 2 feet across and 2 feet deep put in some cow manure and peat moss and lime and get that soil in as good condition as possible, because it's going to last a long time. Now, just before planting it, I want to show you the real key to planting roses. And the way you plant them depends upon what part of the country you live in. This is the key. This point right here where you see the bulge in the stem. Below this bulge is a wild rose root. Above it is the cultivated variety. Now, the reason this root is different from the top is that the root is a very strong rooting variety which will give the strength for the top to grow much better than roses grown from cuttings, let's say, on their own roots under most circumstances. But this bulge is the union between the root and the top and is the weak link. In the northern part of the country, as around here, I have to plant that root, that union, so that it is below the soil surface. Because when the cold winter comes, that weak link has to be protected from the worst of the weather. Now, if you live in the south, you would plant the rose just as you see it there, with this union above the ground. And that because there you have the big problem of the plant sending out suckers from underneath. Now, what we want to do here is to get that bud so it's just barely about 2 inches below the ground level. Well, this is where your feet come in gardening. Firm that soil down, not enough to break the roots, but get it in real solid. We'll pull the soil around that and then add, of course, a plant such as this will get a big drink of water as soon as we get through with this program. So that's how you set your roses in. Notice that they've been cut back. This gives you that strong base to compensate for the roots which have been cut off. Now today I seem to be talking about unusual vegetables, and I have another unusual one called the Jerusalem artichoke. This is what it looks like. This is a North American wildflower in the sunflower family. Very, very delicious. You want to try some of these baked with a roast lamb. Very, very delicious. The plants grow 8 to 10 feet tall if you give them a lot of good soil. Now right in here at the base of my compost pile, I planted one last year. Just put it in the ground about 4 inches deep, cover it over, and that's all there is to it. That thing, last year we got from one plant 10 pounds of roots. Fantastic production. Very, very delicious vegetable, which will grow anywhere in the country. Late in the fall, it has some little yellow sunflower-type blossoms about 3 inches across. Well, I said that we were going to move inside the greenhouse, and there I want to plant some seeds of cucumbers and melons, because I want to gain about a month in their growing season by starting them indoors. Before I plant them, I'd like to show you this fuchsia. This fuchsia is grown as a tree type of plant, cut off all the side stems until we got it up here about 3 feet tall, and then pinched it, and here we get all of these blossoms. I should tell you that last September, about 6 months ago, this thing was 3 inches tall, a little bit of a cutting, and this is what we get out of it, and it will blossom all summer long. A beautiful plant for a partly shaded place. Now we come to planting seeds indoors. The trick, of course, is to give these plants about a month of good warm weather indoors, so that when warm weather finally comes, we'll be a month ahead of the season. So here we have peat pots or a plastic pot or a clay pot, doesn't make any difference. You should sow about 2 seeds in each pot. Just put them on the surface like that in ordinary potting soil, push them in a 1/2 inch deep, and cover them over. Now this must be kept moist, especially now when you have a peat pot which absorbs moisture from the soil. So you've got to make sure these stay moist and warm. When those come up, I'll cut off the weaker one, save the strong one, and the plants will be, 5 or 6 inches tall when I put them out this summer, about a month from now. Well, let's see if we can get to a few questions today. Dear Jim, why are your seedlings compact and bushy, and my lettuce and broccoli seedlings are leggy and delicate? How can I prevent legginess? Well, this is what they should look like. This comes from bright light and cool temperatures. And I'm afraid that your plants have been hot and not full sunshine. That's what makes them leggy. You did not put any fertilizer in the holes when you planted lettuce, broccoli, and cauliflower. Is there some reason? Am I wrong in doing so? Well, I fed the whole bed, dug a 5-10-5 fertilizer into the whole bed so that those roots are going to go all the way through, and I wanted them to have the fertilizer no matter which way they went. And of course, when I set out the seedlings, I did feed them with a liquid fertilizer mixed with a water. Oh, another question. My forsythia is too high. How can I cut it back and still have it bloom next spring? The first thing to remember is that all flowering shrubs should be cut back after they blossom, not necessarily in the spring. So we'll cut the forsythia back in mid-spring after the flowers have faded. Every year go to your plant and cut off the bigger, older, taller canes so that your bush will always stay at the size that you want. But don't just cut the tips off, cut the whole stem, and that way the branches that come up will be in the natural shape of the plant, and that's very important. I hate to see a forsythia that's just been whacked off. 2 years ago, we planted tulip, daffodil, and hyacinth bulbs. This spring, most of these bulbs are sending up small clusters of leaves instead of 1 stalk each. That's just what happens. You should buy new bulbs each year, or you should expect them to do just like that. Well, that's all I have time for today. Now, on my next program, I'm going to plant a new bed of asparagus, and I think you're going to want to see how that's done. I'm going to plant my main crop of potatoes, and I'm going to start some chrysanthemums from cuttings for the perennial border. Now, I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.